Welcome to our deep dive today. We're looking at a whole stack of sources, and they all really point towards one crucial thing in any operation: the people.
Yeah, it's a great mix we've pulled together. There's an academic piece on HR best practices focused on the hospitality sector.
Right? And then some business articles digging into employee morale, work culture, that kind of thing.
We also have a training module that gets into workplace conflict, which is always relevant.
And finally, a really detailed analysis looking at the economics, specifically wages and conditions for restaurant workers.
So our mission really is to sift through all this, pull out the key takeaways, maybe find some surprising connections.
And understand why looking after your people isn't just, the nice thing to do, but actually good for the bottom line.
Yeah,
Seriously good.
exactly. We want to see what the high performers are doing, understand the real impact of good versus bad work environments.
Figure out where conflict fits in, and then look at that restaurant industry. Case study, wages, well-being, the whole picture.
Okay, so let's unpack it. Where do we start?
Let's start with the foundation. Why does focusing on people actually matter so much?
Well, it's pretty clear across all these sources, you can't have excellent operations without excellent employees. It sounds simple, but it's fundamental.
That Cornell source on hospitality HR really hammered this home, didn't it?
It did. It talked about integrated human resource systems being key for, well, both customer value and owner profits. The best companies, the high-performing ones, they use HR strategically. It's a competitive advantage for them.
And that fits perfectly with what the Lyra Health source said: employee morale directly drives productivity, drives engagement.
Yeah, and the XL3 coffee source was pretty blunt about it. Unmotivated staff, sloppy work, people leaving, that tanks profitability.
But flip it around, and a positive culture means happier, more productive staff, which, they argue, directly boosts profit margins. It's a clear link.
It is, so maybe we should quickly define what they mean by morale and culture.
Good idea. Lyra Health describes morale as the overall attitude, the outlook of employees.
Right. High morale teams, they feel supported, cared for, like the company's invested in them, they have good relationships.
Low morale teams feel unsupported, disconnected, often lots of conflict.
And the XL3 coffee source connected good work culture to people feeling like they actually belong, feeling like they can bring their best work.
And when that's missing, they describe this underlying feeling of chaos. Poor communication, everyone just looking out for themselves. Sounds awful.
And draining. The impact of low morale is pretty stark, too. Lyra Health calls it a silent productivity killer.
Wow. They put numbers on absenteeism, didn't they?
Yeah, around $3,600 a year for an hourly employee, $2,650 for salaried. Plus, disengaged folks are, well, they're looking elsewhere.
But the positive side is just as powerful. Lyra Health, again, engaged employees, high morale, can increase profitability by 21%.
That's huge, and cut absenteeism by 41%, reduce turnover by nearly 60%, 59%, they said.
When you see figures like that, it really drives home that this people stuff is core business strategy.
Absolutely. It's an investment, plain and simple, with a real return.
Okay, so if it's so important, how are the companies that get it right actually doing it? The Cornell source gave us those 5 key areas for HR best practices in hotels.
Right, the champions, as they called them. First up was leader development.
This wasn't just about training who's in charge now, but building a pipeline, right, for future leaders.
Exactly, like Marriott's bench strength management system, identifying and grooming people internally.
And I thought that day hospitality group example was fascinating. That mandatory 90-day paid sabbatical for GMs after 5 years.
Yes, specifically for balanced life, preventing burnout. That's thinking long-term about leadership health.
Very proactive.
Yeah.
And Motel 6, letting basically any employee potentially become a GM through clear training steps.
Yeah.
That sends a message.
Definitely. The second category was training and knowledge building. Makes total sense.
Better service, sure, but also reducing labor costs, boosting productivity through skills.
We saw some creative stuff here. Disney's Polynesian Resort using that values-based magic of Polynesia training.
Hyatt Regency Scottsdale, working with local schools to train students, building their own talent pipeline from the community.
And Coastal Hotel Group's buddy system, loaning skilled staff to new properties. Very practical.
Sonesta Hotels even spun off their training into a subsidiary, Training by Design, and made it a revenue stream by training others.
That's really thinking differently. Okay, third category. Employee empowerment.
The idea here is boosting customer service and motivation by giving staff more control, more autonomy.
Right. Like the Ritz-Carlton Tyson's Corner example, self-directed teams of hourly staff handling scheduling, even budgeting,
Yeah.
and the turnover drops significantly.
The Boulders Resort did something similar with housekeeping teams choosing their own areas, inspecting rooms.
And the Minneapolis Airport Hilton saw guest comment cards improve dramatically after letting line staff make decisions to satisfy guests right there on the spot. Trust pays off.
Fourth area, employee recognition. More than just a pat on the back.
The sources see it as a way to communicate priorities. What gets rewarded gets done, basically.
Roadway Inn in Orlando had specific budgets for rewards. Motel Properties started recognition right from the interview.
Embedding it early. And the Houstonian Hotel, an overall champ, paid quarterly bonuses to all staff based on hotel success, not just managers.
That really connects everyone to the bigger picture. Okay, fifth category, cost management.
But this wasn't about cutting corners on people necessarily. It was about being smart with HR costs.
Exactly. Like that small inn at the market outsourcing HR to a consultant instead of hiring full-time. Saved money, got expertise.
Or Sheraton Denver West, using job sharing for a sales role, getting 2 experienced managers' energy for the price of 1.
And Tamar Inns setting up their own self-funded health plan, even their own medical office. The source claimed it saved over $37 million over 10 years.
That shows cost management can actually involve significant investment in well-being, like healthcare, if done smartly.
So what did these champions say were the outcomes?
Well, the top-cited outcomes in the Cornell source were employee satisfaction and improved morale. Over half mentioned that.
Followed by reduced turnover and increased productivity. Makes sense.
Reduced costs and increased profits were in there too, but what I found really interesting was the note about outcomes sometimes being, how do they put it, unseen, unmeasured, and yet strongly felt changes in attitude or work culture.
Right. That connects back to morale being that silent killer. Or, conversely, a silent booster. It's not always on the balance sheet directly, but it's powerful.
Totally. So, okay, we know why it's important. We've seen what some top companies do. What about practical steps? What can organizations actually do to build that culture and boost morale?
Several sources gave really concrete tips, and yeah, there was a lot of overlap, which tells you something.
A big one seemed to be clearly define and communicate your values.
Yeah, foodie coaches said revisit them, display them, update your manuals.
Yeah.
Cat Cellular Coffee said define simple core values and hammer them home from the interview onwards.
So it's lived, not just laminated. What else?
Providing feedback and guidance. Regularly.
Coffee mentioned regular meetings, listening actively. Both they and foodie coaches talked about structured positive feedback, but also, crucially, acknowledging the wins.
Can't forget compensation and recognition either. Lyra Health was clear. Pay needs to be competitive.
But it's not just pay. Recognition matters, shout-outs, career paths, celebrating achievements. XL3 Coffee suggested reward systems that celebrate teamwork, not just stars.
That's a good point, reinforcing the team culture. And supporting employee growth came up again and again.
Lyra, XL3, foodie coaches. All mention development plans, showing people how they can advance, giving them chances to learn, investing in them.
Another theme was fostering purpose and belonging.
Yeah, Lyra talked about helping people see why their work matters and inclusion. XL3 stressed making people feel they belong, supporting work-life integration, even team stuff outside work.
Building connection. Flexibility was mentioned too.
Lyra said, offer flexibility in how, when, where work gets done, if possible. XL3 mentioned being reasonably flexible with schedules for appointments, life stuff, showing humanity.
And a really key lever. Train your managers.
Huge one. Lyra pointed out managers directly shape the daily experience, training them on communication, psychological safety, recognition that boosts morale and loyalty. Foodie coaches echoed that.
And then there's just the basic blocking and tackling. Clear standards and policies.
Right. XL3 and foodie coaches both said have clear ways to handle issues, prevent harassment, ensure respect. The ground rules.
Lastly, don't be afraid to look outside for help.
XL3 suggested using external experts for training on tricky topics like bias, inclusion, well-being. Foodie coaches mentioned using local universities or community groups for hiring help. Lots of resources out there.
So that's a pretty good toolkit, but even with the best intentions and practices, conflict happens.
It does. And that Ohio School Nutrition Association module tackled it head on.
How did they define conflict?
Yeah.
Pretty simply, right?
Yeah, basically when someone, or both sides, can't get what they need or want and are actively pushing their own goals.
And interestingly, the module actually said conflict has value.
Which is counterintuitive, maybe. Yeah, it definitely detailed the destructive side, drains energy, deepens divides, kills morale. We see that.
But the value part implies it could be constructive, maybe, if handled right, leading to better solutions or understanding.
Presumably, the training aimed to help people see how they personally handle conflict. Are they competitive, collaborative, avoiding, based on that Tomich-Killen model?
And the goal was to figure out the most effective resolution mindset for the situation and practice skills like listening, building rapport. So self-awareness and skill building.
Makes sense. Okay, let's shift gears a bit to that one fair wage source. This really zooms in on one industry, restaurants, but touches on so many of these themes: people, well-being, money, culture.
Yeah, it paints a picture of a huge growing industry, poised to be the fourth largest private sector employer. Massive workforce.
But the source argues that growth hasn't really lifted wages or prosperity for many workers within it.
Restaurant workers are a big chunk of minimum wage earners, and even more earn below minimum wage.
And the poverty statistic was stark. Restaurant workers living in poverty at over twice the rate of the general workforce, 19.2% versus 7.9%, according to the source.
A core focus of this source is the tipped subminimum wage, federally stuck at $2.13 an hour since 1991.
And the source traces its history back, connecting it partly to post-Civil War practices where newly freed slaves weren't paid wages, relying entirely on customer tips.
The source then highlights 7 states, Alaska, California, Minnesota, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, that don't have this subminimum wage. Tipped workers get the full state minimum. They call them one fair wage states.
And they present these as a sort of natural experiment. What happens when you eliminate the subminimum wage?
According to their findings, restaurant sales growth and employment growth in these one fair wage states are similar, sometimes even higher, than in states with the lower tipped wage.
They also claim wages are higher and growing faster in those 7 states. And importantly, tipped workers, there are less likely to be in poverty, 9% versus 14% in subminimum states.
And less reliant on food stamps to 11% versus 16%. That points to a difference in economic security.
Now, the source also brings in a really difficult issue: sexual harassment.
Right. It notes women are the majority of restaurant and tipped workers, and it claims women in tipped jobs in the subminimum wage states are twice as likely to experience sexual harassment.
And 3 times as likely to be told to alter their appearance or wear revealing clothing compared to women in the one fair wage states.
The argument the source makes is that relying so heavily on customer tips for your income creates a power imbalance that makes workers more vulnerable, contributing to a negative culture.
The source does acknowledge industry arguments against eliminating the subminimum wage concerns about costs, or that workers might lose tips.
But it counters by pointing to places like San Francisco or Alaska, which have high minimum wages and, reportedly, high tipping rates still, suggesting maybe those fears aren't always realized.
And it's really important we stress this. We're reporting on the findings and arguments presented in this specific source material. That's our task in this deep dive, to convey what the sources say.
Absolutely. We're laying out the information presented. And, while some sources focused on hotels or restaurants, the core ideas seem much broader.
Definitely. This whole deep dive really underscores that connection: how people are managed, their morale, their well-being. It's directly linked to how successful the organization is. Doesn't matter if it's a coffee shop, tech firm, school cafeteria.
Understanding culture, the impact of specific HR actions, how conflict works, even how pay structures affect things. It just gives you, the listener, a more complete picture of any workplace you're in or managing.
Wow, yeah, we covered a lot of ground, from those innovative hotel programs
to the really complex issues around wages and harassment in the restaurant industry discussed in that one source, and practical tips for building better teams.
The common thread, really, through everything is that people aren't just an expense line. They're the engine.
Investing in them. Development, culture, recognition, handling conflict well, thinking about fair pay. These sources argue it leads to real, measurable results for the business and for the individuals.
So maybe something to think about next time you're looking at a workplace. What are those unseen, unmeasured, yet strongly felt things happening? What's the real vibe, the underlying culture?
And what impact is that actually having on everything from how people feel coming to work to the actual bottom line? That's definitely worth considering.